The gavel cracked down, thunderous and final, rattling water pitches until ripples trembled like tiny earthquakes. Gasps surged through the courtroom, sharp and collective, while whispers sparked like wildfire among the gallery. At the witness stand, a young woman's voice fractured, words tumbling out so raw, they froze everyone in place. A juror's knuckles whitened around the armrest, eyes darting toward the judge as if seeking rescue. A coffee cup slipped from the reporter's hand, dark liquid spreading like a stain of guilt across the polished floor. The air thickened, heavy with the gravity of truth laid bare, suffocating yet electric. Behind the defense table, the accused shifted, eyes wide with panic, breath caught in his throat, heart pounding loud enough he swore the jury could hear it. The prosecutor leaned forward, predator's smile breaking through polished charm, scenting blood in the water. The judge's stern gaze scanned the room, his voice booming, order, but no one truly breathed. From this first moment it was undeniable. Lives were about to be destroyed, reputations erased, and the fragile line between victim and accused blurred into shadows no one could escape. The silence hung sharp, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. The young woman on the stand swallowed hard, eyes darting between the defense and prosecution. The accused sat still, every nerve screaming, yet his face forced into a mask. The prosecutor rose slowly, footsteps echoing as if scripted for intimidation. "You claim you are the victim," he said, voice smooth as silk, yet every piece of evidence drags you deeper into the role of the accused. The jury leaned in, caught between curiosity and dread, weighing every syllable. The defense attorney shifted in his chair, frustration flickering across his features. "Yow wow wow." The air thickened, and in that moment, the walls of justice seemed less like guardians of truth, and more like traps designed to suffocate. The defense attorney finally rose, his chair scraping harshly across the floor. His eyes blazed, his tone steady, but strained. "Objection, Your Honor," he declared, voice low but firm. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze cutting through the noise, every wrinkle carved by years of authority. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, breaths shallow, as if waiting for a verdict already. The accused's pulse throbbed in his temples, his gaze locked on the floor, shame and rage wrestling within him. The defense attorney pressed on. "This line of questioning is not just unfair, it is predatory." The judge exhaled, deliberating, the silence louder than any words. The judge's voice finally thundered, sustained. Relief rippled through the defense, but only slightly. The prosecutor's smirk returned, unbroken, as though the ruling had only sharpened his blade. The accused dared a glance at the jury, and in their faces he saw no mercy, only uncertainty carved into frowns. The young woman on the stand closed her eyes, lips trembling, as if holding back more than just tears. In the gallery, whispers grew like an approaching storm, echoing the chaos building beneath the surface. For a heartbeat, the courtroom was a theater, each role performed under an unrelenting spotlight. The defense attorney leaned close to his client, voice low, almost a whisper. "Stay calm," he said, though his own hands betrayed a faint tremor. The accused nodded faintly, jaw tightening, heart pounding. The witness stared down, tears glinting but unshed, her voice caught in her throat. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, basking in the weight of the silence he had conjured. The judge surveyed the room like a weary sentinel, burdened with the knowledge that whatever path this trial took, justice might never truly emerge. And in that silence it was clear, the fight had only just begun, and the cost would be unbearable. The courtroom air grew heavier, as if each word spoken added weight to invisible chains around the accused. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, shoulders squared but trembling beneath the facade. The prosecutor paced slowly, measured steps echoing against the marble, every stride sharpened like a blade. "You want them to believe you," he said coldly, "but truth has a way of bleeding through lies." The words landed like daggers, slicing deeper than evidence ever could. The witness stared at the accused, eyes moist, torn between fear and anger. The defense attorney gritted his teeth, fingers drumming nervously against the table, every second of silence a risk. Jurors exchanged uncertain glances, their judgment forming not from facts but from the currents of tension suffocating the room. The accused's mind screamed for escape, yet the walls seemed to close tighter, leaving no path forward. The defense attorney rose with restrained fury, his tie slightly askew, eyes dark with defiance. "This is intimidation, not justice," he barked, voice carrying the weight of desperation. The prosecutor only smiled, lips curling into something predatory. "Or maybe it's truth," he replied, smooth, deliberate, crafted to pierce. The judge lifted his gavel, but hesitated, torn between intervention and the spectacle unraveling. In the gallery, whispers coiled like smoke, thickening the tension. The accused's chest tightened, breath shallow, each word from the prosecutor, pulling him deeper into the role of a man already condemned. The young woman on the stand squeezed the edge of the witness box, nails digging into wood, her silence more damning than any testimony. The defense attorney slammed his hand on the table. "This is a court of law, not theater." Yet, in every corner of the room, it felt like theater indeed, with lives as the cost of admission. A juror shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing as though weighing more than just words. He leaned slightly toward his neighbor, whispering something too faint to hear, but the movement caught the accused's eye like a knife to the gut. Suspicion bloomed in his chest, a certainty that the jury had already begun weaving a verdict. The prosecutor noticed too, his smile widening, emboldened by the body language of the very people who would decide fate. The defense attorney inhaled sharply, catching the exchange, his pulse racing, though he dared not call it out. The judge's gaze swept the jury box. A flicker of disapproval passing before his face hardened again. The accused's palms grew slick with sweat, his suit suddenly a cage, every thread suffocating him. He could almost hear the whispers building into judgment, even though the room was silent once more. The young woman on the stand finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "He isn't who you think he is," she whispered, and the room seemed to collapse inward. The words slithered into the jurors' ears, painting shadows of doubt with each syllable. The accused's throat tightened, his eyes closing as if to block the sound, yet it echoed louder inside him. The defense attorney tried to object, words caught between rage and despair, but the judge raised his hand before he could. The prosecutor's grin sharpened, eyes glittering with triumph, as though the trial had already tipped in his favor. The gallery gasped, some leaning forward, others recoiling as though the truth had reached out to slap them. It was no longer just testimony. It was execution by words. The silence that followed her words was deafening. The accused sat frozen, every muscle locked, every breath a battle. His attorney whispered urgently, but the words blurred into noise. The prosecutor stepped closer, eyes locked on the accused like a predator closing in. "The truth speaks louder than lies," he declared, voice steady, feeding the fire. The judge tapped his gavel softly, not to silence the room but to regain control of it. Yet no one moved, no one spoke. The jurors stared, caught in a tide of doubt that now seemed irreversible. In that instant, the accused realized the walls around him weren't built of brick or law but of perception, and those walls were caving in fast. The courtroom shifted like a storm gathering, tension mounting with every word exchanged. Witnesses contradicted themselves under oath, weaving testimonies tangled with lies and fractured truths. The defense attorney pressed hard, voice sharp with urgency, but each correction seemed swallowed by fresh distortions. The prosecutor thrived on the chaos, leaning into every inconsistency, twisting them into daggers against the accused. The jury watched, brows furrowed, caught in a maze where no path led to certainty. The accused clenched his fists beneath the table, nails carving crescents into his palms, rage boiling but trapped beneath silence. The young woman on the stand shifted nervously, eyes darting between both tables, as though truth itself had fled. The judge's patience thinned, gavel tapping lightly, his eyes narrowing at the circus unfolding before him. What was meant to be justice felt more like execution by confusion. A new witness stepped forward, his footsteps slow, hesitant, yet his eyes carried secrets too heavy to hide. He took the oath, voice wavering as though each word cost him more than breath. The prosecutor smiled warmly, masking the blade beneath his tone. "Tell us what you saw that night." The man's jaw quivered, his lips parting as he recited events that painted the accused in damning colors. The defense attorney rose quickly, objecting with passion, but the damage had already seeped into the jurors' minds like poison. The accused's heart thundered, his eyes burning with disbelief at words twisted beyond recognition. The gallery leaned forward, hungry for revelation, whispers crawling like serpents through the silence. The judge looked weary, yet his gaze stayed fixed on the trembling man, knowing this testimony would turn the tide. The defense attorney struck back, his voice cutting sharp through the courtroom haze. "This witness cannot be trusted," he thundered, pacing before the jury, hands slicing through air. He pointed toward the contradictions, unraveling the testimony like frayed thread, exposing holes wide enough for doubt to crawl through. Yet the prosecutor interjected with icy calm, countering every challenge with venomous precision. The accused's eyes tracked them both like a cornered animal, sweat dripping down his temple, the weight of survival crushing his chest. The jury watched in silence, expressions shifting like shadows under flickering light, their minds caught between reason and persuasion. The witness shrank further into the stand, eyes downcast, shoulders heavy with shame, as though truth and lies had merged into one indistinguishable blur. The young woman returned to the stand, summoned once more, her breath shaky, her hands trembling as she touched the microphone. "I didn't mean to lie," she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of guilt. Gasps echoed through the gallery, each sound a dagger into the silence. The prosecutor shot forward, seizing the moment, painting her wavering as proof against the accused. The defense attorney roared his objection, his voice straining against the tide already crashing in. The accused looked at her with wide, anguished eyes, as if pleading without words, his face pale, drained of hope. The judge slammed the gavel, desperate to restore order, but the chaos had already been unleashed. The room no longer felt like a place of law, but a battlefield where truth was the casualty. The gavel's echo faded, but the chaos clung to the walls like smoke. The accused leaned forward, head in his hands, breath shallow and uneven. His attorney whispered frantically, but the words washed over him like distant noise. Across the room, the prosecutor stood tall, basking in the damage wrought, confidence radiating like poison. The jury sat stiff, their faces etched with doubt, unease, and quiet fear. The witness stared at the floor, tears dripping silently, her testimony unraveling her own conscience. The judge, weary-eyed, pressed his hand to his brow, his role heavy with the weight of unraveling order. The accused finally raised his head, eyes hollow but burning, realization dawning that survival required more than defense. It demanded a fight he had never wanted to wage. The courtroom grew colder as shadows stretched across the wood-paneled walls, late sunlight slicing through narrow windows. The prosecutor's tone sharpened, voice curling with venom. "You've hidden too much for too long," he said, pacing like a predator stalking prey. The defense attorney stiffened, sensing the trap about to spring. The accused's chest tightened, beads of sweat marking the pressure he could not escape. The witness shifted uncomfortably, eyes wide, as if carrying secrets she feared would explode. The gallery whispered, fragments of rumor igniting speculation. The judge leaned back, fingers pressed to his chin, silently calculating how far this spectacle could spiral. Every word now carried an edge, each glance a dagger waiting to be unsheathed. A new document was introduced, its edges frayed, its ink ominous. The prosecutor held it high, his voice loud enough to pierce silence. "A will forged in greed," he declared, eyes glinting with triumph. Gasps echoed, jurors shifting forward. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Forgery has not been proven. But the prosecutor's smirk deepened. The accused's breath hitched, blood draining from his face as the paper's words threatened to erase any chance of freedom. The judge adjusted his glasses, frowning, weighing whether to admit the revelation. The gallery erupted in whispers, a storm of speculation rising unchecked. Truth or trap? It no longer mattered. The seed of betrayal had been planted. The accused's heart thundered as the prosecutor's words cut deeper. From the gallery, A familiar face appeared. His estranged brother, seated quietly, eyes cold and unforgiving. The realization struck like lightning. Betrayal had not come from the stranger but from blood. The defense attorney whispered urgently, "Don't react." But the accused's jaw trembled, rage and grief colliding. The jurors noticed, eyes narrowing, questions swirling silently. The prosecutor leaned closer to the bench, his voice dripping malice. "Sometimes truth is hidden where we least expect it." The gallery's whispers grew, fueled by the tension of exposed wounds. The accused sat hollow, shackled not by chains, but by treachery. The young woman on the stand trembled, her lips quivering as she whispered, "He told me to say nothing." The room froze, all eyes snapping toward the estranged brother in the gallery. His jaw set tight, but a flicker of guilt betrayed him. The prosecutor seized the moment, a conspiracy built on silence orchestrated within family. The accused's chest heaved, eyes wide with devastation. The defense attorney roared his objection, but the gavel slammed, cutting through the chaos. The jurors shifted, their faces etched with uncertainty, caught between family betrayal and courtroom theater. The gallery buzzed, whispers spilling like wildfire. In that instant, the hidden daggers of kinship had cut deeper than any enemy could. The gavel's echo lingered as the judge leaned forward, voice low but stern. "Control this courtroom, or it collapses." His words were both command and warning. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, victorious gleam unbroken. The defense attorney sat heavily, frustration pulling lines across his face. The accused's gaze locked on his brother. A silent war raging across the distance, their bond fractured beyond repair. The jurors whispered among themselves, their eyes dark with confusion and suspicion. The young woman buried her face in her hands, tears falling unchecked. The gallery buzzed with voices rising like thunder, every spectator fueled by the scandal unraveling. And in the storm's eye, the accused knew this was no longer just trial, but betrayal made public. The tension reached a breaking point as the prosecutor placed a sealed envelope on the judge's bench. The paper was thin, yet its weight seemed crushing, as if carrying lives inside. The defense attorney leaned forward, eyes narrowing with dread. The judge opened it slowly, his hands steady, but his jaw tight. The gallery held its breath as silence thickened like smoke. "A letter," the prosecutor announced, his smile controlled, "written by the accused hidden from this court until now." The accused's heart seized, blood roaring in his ears. He shook his head violently, whispering, "That's not mine." The defense attorney rose, voice trembling with fury. "Forgery. This cannot be admitted without proof." Yet the jurors leaned in, captivated, their eyes wide with hunger for revelation. The air turned electric, and the trial's balance shifted. The letter was read aloud, words echoing like knives against stone. "I cannot run from what I did," the judge recited, voice deep, steady, merciless. Murmurs exploded across the gallery, each syllable igniting suspicion. The accused's face twisted, disbelief carved into every line. "I never wrote that," he shouted, his voice hoarse, breaking the solemnity of the room. The prosecutor folded his arms, mask of satisfaction unshaken. The defense attorney shouted an objection, but the judge silenced him with a glare. The jurors exchanged sharp glances, doubt spreading like wildfire through their eyes. The young woman on the stand looked down, her hands trembling, as though she carried knowledge of the letter's true origin. The air was heavy, the sense of betrayal suffocating. The accused realized the trial was no longer about truth, but survival. The defense attorney fought back, pacing before the jury, his words fierce and fiery. "This letter is a fabrication, a weapon forged to destroy my client." His voice cracked with conviction, though fatigue shadowed his face. The prosecutor rose, cold and sharp. "Or perhaps it is the truth your client has denied for too long." The accused gripped the edge of the table, veins pulsing, fury burning in his eyes. The jurors shifted, torn between passion and cold logic, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. The judge watched carefully, tapping the gavel softly, as if weighing control against chaos. The gallery roared with whispers, waves of suspicion flooding the chamber. The accused's despair deepened, yet a flicker of rage stirred, a will to fight back, no matter how poisoned the battlefield had become. The young woman was called again, her steps hesitant, shoulders hunched as she returned to the stand. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I've seen that letter before." The gallery erupted, chaos spilling like fire, while the prosecutor's smirk widened. The defense attorney slammed the table, shouting, "You're being coerced." The accused's stomach dropped, his eyes locked on her, desperate for a truth that could save him. She avoided his gaze, her tears falling unchecked, her silence louder than any scream. The juror's eyes pierced her, weighing guilt and innocence in equal measure. The judge slammed the gavel repeatedly, but order was gone. In that moment, betrayal and revelation merged, truth weaponized, lives crushed under its weight. The accused rose suddenly, voice hoarse, breaking through the uproar. "I am not the monster you make me." His words rang like thunder, his fists shaking at his side. The gallery gasped, some shrinking back, others leaning forward hungrily. Prosecutor's smirk faltered, only for a heartbeat, but the damage was done. The defense attorney tried to steady him, but the storm had already broken. The jurors stared, their eyes wide, some touched by desperation, others hardened by suspicion. The judge's gavel struck like lightning, demanding silence, but the energy in the room was unstoppable. The accused's face burned with fury, his voice trembling as he shouted, "The truth has been buried, and I will not be its grave." The courtroom froze, suspended between fear and revelation. The courtroom boiled with tension, every heartbeat sensing with the relentless ticking of the clock. The prosecutor rose for his closing, eyes ablaze with calculated fire. "Justice demands courage," he declared, each syllable slicing the air. He painted the accused as a manipulator, a wolf in human skin. The jurors leaned forward, their faces pale, their pens forgotten. The defense attorney clenched his fists under the table, powerless to halt the avalanche. The accused sat rigid, his breathing shallow, fury simmering beneath despair. The gallery roared with whispers, eager for blood disguised as justice. The judge's gavel struck, but the sound vanished in the storm of words. The prosecutor's voice sharpened like a blade, "Do not be deceived by pleas of innocence." Each word dug deeper, carving the accused's fate before the verdict was even written. The defense attorney rose slowly, his movements heavy with exhaustion yet fueled by conviction. His voice cracked but carried resolve. "My client is not perfect," he said, pacing before the jury. "But imperfection is not guilt." He dissected the prosecutor's narrative, exposing cracks, pleading for reason over rage. The accused lifted his head, eyes burning with desperate hope, as if clinging to each word like oxygen. The prosecutor sneered, jotting notes, but his composure flickered briefly. The jurors shifted uneasily, their faces conflicted, caught between eloquence and suspicion. The gallery murmured, some nodding, others scoffing. The judge leaned forward, studying every flicker of emotion, aware the weight of history was about to fall on this chamber. The attorney's final words rang out, "Justice is not vengeance. Remember that." The accused rose suddenly, against his attorney's desperate warning hand. His voice trembled, raw, but it carried across the chamber. "I have been hunted, not tried," he declared, fists clenched, tears brimming. Gasps shot through the gallery, some startled, others enthralled. Every word twisted, every silence poisoned, he cried, his chest heaving. Prosecutor slammed his hand on the table, barking, "This is a stunt." But the jury was transfixed, eyes wide as the accused bared his soul. The defense attorney whispered urgently, begging him to stop, yet the words spilled unchained. The judge shouted for order, gavel slamming like thunder, but control slipped through his fingers. The air crackled with chaos, the trial consumed by an eruption of raw truth and fury. The courtroom spiraled, voices clashing, whispers turning to shouts. The young woman at the stand broke suddenly, her voice piercing the storm. "It wasn't him," she screamed, sobbing uncontrollably. The room froze, her confession detonating like dynamite. The prosecutor staggered, his confident mask cracking. The accused gasped, tears burning down his face. The defense attorney surged to his feet. "Say it again," he urged. She collapsed forward, her hands trembling, her sobs echoing. "It was his brother. He made me lie." The gallery erupted, chaos boiling to hysteria. The jurors' faces drained of color, some clutching the rail before them. The judge's gavel pounded endlessly, but the truth had already broken free, a flood unstoppable. The gavel's thunder barely cut through the uproar. The estranged brother rose from the gallery, his face pale, his eyes wild. For a heartbeat, silence strangled the room, anticipation choking every breath. Then his voice shattered it. "She lies," he roared, pointing toward the witness. Gasps shot across the room, the gallery recoiling. The prosecutor froze, realizing his star witness had become his undoing. The defense attorney locked eyes with the jury, sensing the tide shifting at last. The accused leaned forward, his breath ragged, hope flickering against despair. The judge's voice thundered, demanding order, yet even he knew the trial had cracked wide open. The breaking point had arrived, and no one would leave untouched. The courtroom stood on the edge of collapse. The judge's gavel echoed, yet it could not silence the storm of voices clashing across the chamber. The estranged brother's denial hung heavy, but the young woman's sobs drowned it with truth too raw to ignore. The prosecutor tried to salvage order, but his words fell flat, his confidence cracked. The defense attorney seized the silence, his voice strong. "This trial has revealed betrayal, manipulation, and corruption. My client is the victim, not the villain." The accused sat trembling, his hands clenched tight, hope flickering like a fragile flame. The jury shifted, weighing every shattered piece of testimony, their eyes heavy with uncertainty. The gallery leaned forward, breathless, knowing history was being written before them. The breaking point had passed, now only the final blow remained. The judge's voice thundered, commanding silence that finally fell like a curtain. His gaze swept across the room, weary yet resolute. This jury must decide, and they will decide only on evidence, not chaos. His words steadied the chamber, yet the tension coiled tighter. The prosecutor sat rigid, sweat glistening on his brow, his certainty eroded. The defense attorney leaned against the table, exhausted but unbroken, his eyes locked on the jury. The accused sat upright, breathing shallow, his fate no longer in his hands. The young woman clutched her trembling hands together, as if praying silently for redemption. The estranged brother glared across the courtroom, fury burning through his mask of composure. The jurors bowed their heads, preparing to carry the heaviest weight of all: judgment. The jury filed out, their footsteps heavy, silence stretching in their absence. The gallery whispered nervously, each breath carrying speculation. The accused sat frozen, his eyes hollow, his attorney's hand resting lightly on his shoulder in fragile reassurance. Across the aisle, the prosecutor sat stiff, his jaw tight, pen tapping against the table like a drumbeat of dread. The young woman wept silently, guilt etched across her face, her tears darkening the wood beneath her. The estranged brother sat back, his expression a storm of defiance and fear. The judge leaned forward, fingers laced, waiting with patience forged from decades of trials. The air felt heavier than stone, the anticipation suffocating. Minutes dragged into hours, every tick of the clock pounding louder than the gavel itself. The jury returned, their faces pale, their steps deliberate. The gallery stiffened, silence pressing like a vice. The judge's voice rang out, steady. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, a paper trembling in hand. "We have, Your Honor." The accused gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breath locked in his chest. His attorney's lips moved silently, as though offering a prayer. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes burning, desperate to seize the final word. The witness covered her face, unable to watch, while the estranged brother sat rigid, unblinking. The jurors' eyes flickered between the paper and the accused, their expressions unreadable. The moment was thick with suspense, every soul bracing for the blade of truth. The foreperson's voice broke the silence. "Not guilty." Gasps ripped through the gallery, some of shock, others of relief. The accused's head dropped into his hands, his shoulders shaking with a release too heavy to bear. His attorney gripped his arm, a whisper of triumph escaping his lips. The prosecutor collapsed into his chair, his pen falling from his fingers, his mask shattered. The young woman wept harder, her confession vindicated but her soul still bleeding. The estranged brother's face twisted, rage and despair colliding, his betrayal exposed. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order, though the courtroom would never truly be silent again. The final words hung like smoke in the air, unforgettable, not guilty. Yet the scars carved by this trial would never fade.